A very good evening and welcome to KIVUMBI2022 right here on KTN News. My name is Eric Latif. With 21 days to the election, all questions are being asked to the IEBC. Are you ready? Are you prepared? Do you have all your ducks in a row? But then tonight, we want to ask, there are other players in the election. There's the judiciary, there are the security agents, there's the media, there are election observers. All of these have a role to play in the general election, in dissemination of news and information to everybody else, in looking at the credibility of the general election. So tonight we want to focus on one section of the society, and this is the election observers. I'm joined in here by Mule Musao. He is the national coordinator of the Elections Observation Group, ELOG. Mule, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Mule, there are 21 days to the election. Yesterday, you released a statement as the consortium of civil society organizations and religious organizations that are monitoring the election. And you raised still some serious issues with the IEBC. Just take us through those issues first.
Well, thank you for having me once again. So yesterday, yes, under the Uchaguzi platform, which brings together a number of civil society actors who are all observers of this election, we gave out a statement knowing that there were 122 days to the elections. 4 issues stood out for us. First was we are still having concerns with election technology. You remember that IEBC did a simulation in terms of the transmission process, which never went very well. They agreed that they would do another simulation that we were waiting for last week. So far, we have not seen anything happen. Our hope is that this week, IEBC will be able to therefore conduct the simulation exercise. So, so that's the first point. The second point is that we were also looking at the questions of to do with the voter register. Since KPMG did the audit, we have not gotten the official voter register. Everybody's been asking for where this voter register is. You remember the last public position which was given by IEBC was that they were going to give the final register together with the implementation framework of what the commission had been able to do. So that has not happened. We raised the issue of electoral offenses, considering that we are in a campaign period, and a number of things keep happening all over the place. We are not seeing the level of violence that we witnessed in the 2017 campaign period, but granted, we still have enough electoral offenses which are being committed: voter bribery, violence, intimidation, hate speech, which we think needs to be actioned on. And the last point was on the question of integrity. I think our statement was coming a day or 2 days after the Supreme Court had made a ruling on the Mombasa gubernatorial aspirant Mike Sonko in terms of his impeachment. And I think we are applauding the fact that the Supreme Court has been able to champion a cause which is articulated by Article 6 of the Constitution. And we are asking, I mean, can that be a threshold upon which we can be able to be built on the questions to do with integrity, especially when it comes to public positions that we aspire for in the country?
Very many questions that you've been asking, and if you look at, you're asking these 22 days to an election, you have observed previous elections, 2017 and others. If you compare our level of preparedness or the number of questions that are being pushed to the IEBC at this stage, compare that with 2017, how do they fare?
I think if you have to put this in perspective, one, I think there's much more alertness that we have in the run-up to the 2022 elections than we had in 2017. And
by alertness, what do you mean?
Alertness, I mean by actors. So many actors are aware of issues that need to be handled. Let's talk about politicians, for instance. Everybody is been running to the courts for adjudication of one issue, arbitration of one issue or another. We have had nearly every step of the process. So whether it's voter registration, whether it's the nomination of political aspirants, whether it's the registration process, to even the issues to do with the electoral dispute resolutions by IEBC and others, people have been running to court, people have been asking questions. Media has been on point in terms of following every aspect of our election. And then we have the observers. We have other actors like the faith-based organizations, the churches. They've been, every week they've been giving out statements in terms of the state of electoral preparedness. So I think we have created some alertness with a concert of actors that has been putting IEBC and other actors who are supposed to prepare the elections to the sword. So that would be the difference, because in 2017, not very many of us were that very active. We had observers, yes. We had, in fact, one of the very interesting issues that we have not even heard so much from the international community as much as the local actors themselves have been active. But in 2017, that was nearly opposite. It was the international actors who are calling out on the preparations of the IEBC and a few local actors here and there. So I think for me, that's a major difference that we have seen. In terms of the preparations, we had late laws. If we are to compare, we had issues about late laws in 2017. We had issues about the register in 2017. We had issues to do with the electronic transmission of results or even election technology. So they have been there, but this time we just have too many eyes which are watching what is happening and therefore able to raise far too more questions.
Does ELOG bring together just the local election observers? This is local civil society and faith-based organizations, or are there some international actors within ELOG?
So ELOG is established as a domestic election platform, observation platform. It brings together citizen observation groups in the country who are based on an inclusive approach, whereby we have faith-based organizations represented. We have civil society organizations which have been working in elections for a very long time. We also have interest-based organizations such as organizations which represent women. Others, we have organizations which are representing even United Disabled Persons of Kenya, for instance. We have an organization called the Legal Resource Foundation, whose major focus is on prisoners and their rights, even in participation in elections. So basically it's an inclusive platform which tries to bring as many actors into the fore as possible. We even have an organization which focuses its work on Chama women called Badili Africa. So these are all our members of ELOG. The international angle of it is anchored on the fact that we are members of what you call the Global Network of Domestic Election Monitors, which is a global body. It brings together such other organizations in the other countries as ELOG. We commune together, we have benchmarking, we work together in terms of respective elections. For these elections, for instance, ELOG will be partnering with what is called CDD CODEO, the Coalition of Domestic Election Observers of Ghana. We're sending 30 observers to Kenya. We'll also be having observers from Sierra Leone who will be coming to Kenya, working with us through the invitation of ELOG to come and participate as peers in observing our election in the country. We also have the regional, within the East African region, what we call the Eastern Horn of Africa Election Observation Network, which brings actors within 5 Eastern Africa countries, including Ethiopia, the 3 East African countries, Sudan, South Sudan even. We will also be sending observers to Kenya. So we work with partners, we work with peers, but locally we work with the citizen election platforms and civil society organizations.
You know, now we want to talk about the preparedness of the various actors. I said I would like us to focus today on the observers.
Yes.
Starting first of all with the understanding, what is it that observers do? We only hear statements from the observers, especially now you'll hear AU observers have passed that election as free, fair, democratic. There were only minor challenges which did not really affect the outcome and the will of the people. The EU observers but we never hear about like domestic observers. What do observers do? What is observing?
Observing is the systematic process that is used to be able to collect information on an election process through a purposeful mechanism, and at the end of the day analyzing the information that you've gotten from that entire process, especially in terms of an election, and drawing an opinion on it. So basically what observers do in respect to elections is that on the basis of the electoral infrastructure, which includes the laws of the country, the management of the process, the inclusion of actors to participate in the process, the rights issues of voters. So that entire framework of how a country conducts its election is observed for purposes of then giving opinions in terms of whether it is being followed, whether it's a credible process, whether it's a fair and free process, and that's the reason why you hear those words coming throughout. Was it a credible process? Was it a peaceful process? Was it free and was it fair? So that if in respect to international protocols and local protocols that we are observing, such as universal suffrage, the idea of every person of majority age in a democratic country ought to participate in an electoral process, then you gather information on how those people are enabled, the process through which they participate in this, and then you give an opinion on it. So it allows either to draw confidence in the process or bring out issues that need to be attended to, not necessarily after the election, and that was the traditional approach. The traditional approach was once an election is over, give a report, then people work on it. Now what we are doing, we are being very proactive. So
you're giving a report as the process is
going on. A good example is what ELOG is doing at the moment. We have had long-term observers since January. Actually, we had posted a team of long-term observers around the time the BBI process was being prosecuted across the country. So we wanted feedback. What are the people saying? Because a referendum is an election process. So from January, every end of the month, we've been issuing out reports. This is what you are seeing from the 290 constituencies, because we have field observers in every constituency. So we gather that information systematically through a checklist, tools, they report back, we analyze, we have a team of experts who can be able to go through each of the issues. We use a lens of around 8 thematic areas, which include the legal framework itself, voter education, voter registration, media in terms of how you're covering that election, electoral security and violence, what is happening in the field, participation of special interest group, and even the election administration itself. So what IEBC is doing, what the Registrar of Political Parties is doing, what Parliament as an election management body, because they pass laws for the election, we keep tracking it and speaking on it.
You know, as media houses, we also prepare to cover the election.
Yes.
And the preparation doesn't just begin, a month to the election. It begins much earlier, because we all know when the election is going to take place.
Yes.
And the preparation includes, what kind of presence are we going to have across the polling stations?
Yes.
If not the polling stations, then the polling centers. If not the polling centers, then the constituencies or the counties at the national level. Or how are we going to get information coming so we can report in real time to the public?
Yes.
Now, I'd assume that the observers have the same.
Yes.
That means you have a network
yes.
of people out in the field, and then you've got to know how you're distributing them.
Yes.
So in terms of ELOG, how are you distributing your observers? Do you have observers at every polling station in the country? That is 46,232. Or do you have observers at just at the national level?
First, it's important to be able to say that, or state that observation is basically a volunteer activity. Citizens volunteer to participate in an election process such as this, and they have to leave their work to be able to observe. But for that, you also have to facilitate them to be able to do this job. And we have, if in a country where we have, like for instance, 46,000 polling stations, for ELOG to have an observer in every of those stations, that means you have to have over 46, the same number in terms, the same number of
an observer per station.
Per station. So if you are even to pay those people 1,000 shillings, you'll be looking at over 46 million shillings that you have to pay to just that observation. And that is, we have not talked about the training part, we have not talked about the preparation part, any materials that you may be giving them. So it's a very expensive affair. So what we do, and this is the practice I think across the world, is that you sample the country. You get a sample of the polling station that you have. There are some things that which have to count in that sample. For instance, if you have 1,450 wards, you want at least one, as the military say, one boot, at the very least one boot in every of the wards, depending on the resources that you've been able to accumulate. So in the current election, we are having at least 2 observers per ward, at the very least. We seek to have a total of just over 5,000 observers countrywide. We'll be distributing them to different polling stations, but very well represented in terms of geography and coverage of the country.
So at least 2 observers in every ward. That's about 2,900.
Yes.
In the wards.
Yes.
And then now you have more.
Of course, now we have more, which are further distributed on the basis of the methods that you're using, because we use different methods.
Okay.
We have what we'd call a general observation. If we were just to distribute it in terms of the numbers and what I've given you, then basically we are talking about having about 3 observers per ward. But then we go to further samples, depending on population density, depending on the rural-urban arrangements. So we have to go through a very weighted process in terms of the sample that allows us to know where are we putting more people and lower people. But the very least is what I'm saying, at the very least should be 2 observers. So there could be even more than 2 in a ward. So that's how we have sampled the country. These observers are able to give you feedback on the basis of that. The very strictly scientific sample will be distributed in such a way that they actually give us very quick information that allows us to be able to assess the quality, for instance, of the election day processes. But not only that, also give a projection of the election results. And this is what we call the parallel vote tabulation process, which the political parties are also trying to do by saying they're also going to have their own tally centers. So observers also have their own.
Thank you very much for going there, because that's what I'd like us to focus on in the second half of this conversation.
Okay.
When we have observers on the ground, everybody is talking about the IEBC. Is the IEBC ready? Do they have the ballot papers printed? Do they have the electoral officials all trained? Are they all deployed? Do they have the money? Do they know who's going to be on the ballot? Fine, it's the IEBC. But then we have other actors, like we are saying this evening. Election observers are crucial actors, because in this election, for example, they may be able to start projecting the winner, or they may start even having the parallel tallying, and they may start announcing what they are seeing on the ground. That could also be potential for very many things in the country. And that's why we want to focus on the election observers. Time for us to take a break. This is KIVUMBI2022 on KTN News. My name is Eric Latif. My guest this evening is Mule Musau, the National Coordinator of the Elections Observation Group, ELOG. We'll be back shortly.